the first shape that we're going to work on is a sphere. So we need to open up Photoshop, create a new document, select letter size, and give it a title of sphere. We're going to do each of these forms one at a time, so in a new document for each one. So create the first one. Control 0 will zero it out, so it'll zoom in a little bit. And we need to take a look at the image that we're going to be creating. So you could use these images up here to base your sphere, your cube, your cylinder on, and then you can look here to make sure that you're checking out the different parts of the shadows and the lights that you need to be aware of. So a sphere is a really great example because it sort of encompasses all the different types of shadows and a nice gradation in there as well. Nice smooth rounded edge, and that's what we want to get after. So in Photoshop, the first thing that you need to do is to go down the left hand side of the tools menu until you find the shapes tools, and it could be a rectangle, rounded. I'm not sure exactly which one you have up first, but you do need to select the ellipse tool. So the ellipse tool will allow us to draw ellipses. If we don't press shift, you can see that we draw sort of stretched out circles, but if we press shift and hold it, that actually makes a perfect circle, which is what we want. So press shift and drag until you have a decent sized object. Now by default it's probably going to look something like this, but what I'd like for you to do is to change it to a different fill color and a different stroke type. So the fill is going to be white, and then the stroke should be black. So use the eyedropper tool to select the strokes and the fill color, and then we're just going to make this width of that stroke a little bit smaller. 1.0 would be 1 pixel, so somewhere around 1 or 2 pixels. Doesn't really matter what, but you do want just a little bit there so that you can see what you're going to be working with. You can set this shape where you want it. I'm going to have the shadow falling off to the right, so I'll have it just a little off center to the left, and then I'm going to get ready to paint. Now I don't want to paint directly on this shape menu or on the shape tool, or the shape layer, sorry, that I've created here, and there's a reason for that which will become apparent pretty soon. So what you need to, sorry for the little break in the recording, technical glitch. So we've got the sphere, sorry, we've got the circle laid out somewhere on the page where we want it, and we're switching back and forth. You can switch back and forth between the reference image and Photoshop by pressing Alt-Tab. That's a great shortcut to know and get used to. So using that, going back and forth, I'm going to use this for reference, and now I'm going to start painting the shadows in. So what I need to do is make sure that the ellipse layer is selected and click on New Layer, and then I'm going to choose the brush. Make sure that you choose the brush and not the history brush. Sometimes the history brush gets chosen and students aren't sure why it's not working. Well, simple thing. Make sure you have the brush tool selected, and you're going to choose black to be the color that you're painting with. Okay. If you ever have a color that's other than black or white and you want it to reset, just click on the little black and white boxes above the bigger black and white boxes, and that'll reset the foreground background colors. So we're going to be painting with black. Make sure that your opacity up here in the options is fairly low. I would suggest low teens to start out with, and then a fairly decent sized brush, maybe about 350 or so pixels, and also just make sure it's soft because you do want it to blend. So what we're doing when these options are selected, that opacity is going to make it so that we're painting in gray, and if we brought the opacity up, obviously we'd be painting in black. So what we are going to start doing then is following the contour of that sphere. We're going to start painting. So imagine that light is going to be wrapping around following the contour of the sphere as you go farther away. And as you layer it up, it's slowly going to get black. It's okay if you paint outside of the lines on this, and in a moment it's going to become apparent because of what we're going to be doing over here. So it's really important that you are painting on a separate layer from the shape layer. If you are painting on the same layer as the shape, you're not going to be able to clean up the edge in this method that I'm going to show you in a moment. So just keep going back and forth between the reference image and this image until you're pretty happy with how it looks. You want just a general sense of it fading from light to dark, and if there's an area that ends up being too dark, you can use the eraser tool and take away some of that just to get the blending a little bit better. If it blends too quickly, it's kind of up to you how you want it to look. The general idea is that if it's going to fade from the lightest area to the darkest area, and then there's going to be a little bit of reflected light here playing with the edge of the shape. So make sure that you have that rendered like you're seeing it. And then once you're pretty happy with how that looks, you're actually going to take it and use a clipping layer. Now, or a clipping mask. Now, clipping mask is different than the regular mask that we've been using in that we are not going to be masking content in the same layer. Okay, so if I was to apply a mask to this layer just like we've done in previous projects, then I could paint on the mask and take away that information. So the clipping mask is actually going to take away all of the information in this layer that we don't need by clipping it to the layer below. So if you remember, in the ellipse layer we actually created a shape that fills up part of the layer, and then in this layer, the layer where we've shaded it, we have shaded up above it on the next layer. So what we need to do is use the layer that's beneath and clip it to the layer on top. And what that does is it only allows this top layer to show up where there's information in the layer below it. So this can be used in a bunch of different ways. If you have shapes or text or anything in the lower layer, you can actually have a lot of fun with the clipping mask. But for this, we want the shadow to appear in a perfect circle. So the way that you do that is make sure that your layer is above the layer beneath it that you want to clip it to. Right click and create clipping mask. Now watch what happens when I select this. Instantly it cleans up that edge. So all of those areas that I was painting outside of the line don't matter anymore. And I can continue editing from there. So if I want to go ahead and start painting more of the shadow back in, this is how I will do it. And because it's clipped right now, it doesn't really matter if I click on the outside of the area. It's not going to show up, which is kind of a cool little feature and a great way to create shapes that are constrained perfectly. So the next thing that we need to do, if we look at this, is to create this shadow, the cast shadow that this ball is creating. Now you don't need to know words like umbra, penumbra, antumbra, but just the idea that there are areas that are darker and there are areas that are lighter in those shadows. So we're going to start with the Ellipse tool, and we're going to make the shadow completely black. But we need to draw it below the ellipse and below the sphere. So we're going to click on the background layer, and then we're going to draw an ellipse. Okay, and we're going to make sure that the red ring is not there and that the shadow is black. So now when I look at it, I could leave it just like this, but I do want to fade it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is create a layer mask, and I'm going to paint on that mask with a pretty light opacity, and I'm going to then create these areas that are lighter and darker on that shadow. So that's the general way that you create this sphere using a clipping mask, and then use a normal layer mask to work with the shadow and create the different values there.